Ghost of Yotei takes the foundation of the combat system from Ghost of Tsushima and expands upon it in nearly every way. While you might feel like you should be able to take on the world with no problem as a badass samurai, Ghost of Yotei can be surprisingly difficult, even on the normal difficulty setting if you're not careful. Luckily, we've compiled a list of 9 combat tips to make sure you can easily cut your way through the fields, mountains, and forests of Ezo on Atsu's quest for revenge against the Yotei Six. Before even getting into the ins and outs of combat, the first rule to literally live and die by is don't mash. It might seem like a good idea to wail on enemies to hopefully wear them down. However, Ghost of Yotei takes a much more considered approach to its combat, and if you mash mindlessly, especially in fights with large groups, you're almost guaranteed to be killed. Instead of mashing, we'd recommend making a few precise slashes at a time and then considering your next move before attacking again. That said, Ghost of Yotei gives Atsu 2 basic sword attacks right from the jump, a fast striking light attack and a guard breaking heavy attack. These are the bread and butter of your combat abilities, but while they might sound a little self-explanatory, it's important to use each attack type for the proper situation. Light attacks are the attacks you want to use when dealing damage against unguarded foes. If you see an opening where you want to dish out some damage, then you'll want to slice through enemies with quick attacks. However, you should only be using them when you have an opening. Otherwise, enemies can easily block and deflect your attacks, leaving you wide open. If you're looking to make an opening for yourself, that's when you'll want to use heavy attacks to break the guard of an enemy. Keep an eye on the bar above an enemy's head to see how close they are to breaking. If you can break their guard, then you can swoop in with a few lethal quick strikes. Breaking an enemy's guard, however, isn't the most reliable option, since it usually takes several heavy attacks to do, which are slow and can leave you open to the enemy mobs that frequently populate the world of Ghost of Yotei. Instead, it's best to weigh offense and defense equally when getting into combat encounters, since having a good defense can often completely subvert the need to break an enemy's guard using heavy attacks. To best make use of your defensive tactics, you'll need to learn how to read the various incoming enemy attacks. While enemies using different weapons attack in different ways, Ghost of Yotei color codes their moves so you can easily read what they're planning on doing. Basic attacks have no color code and can be blocked by holding L1, deflected or parried by tapping L1 at the general moment when an incoming attack lands, or perfectly parried by tapping L1 at the precise moment an attack comes in. If you deflect or perfect parry an enemy, they'll be left wide open for some quick attacks. When an enemy is using an attack that has a blue glint to it, it means that you won't be able to block it simply by holding down L1. Instead, to avoid taking damage, you'll need to dodge with the circle button or deflect or parry the attack by tapping L1. Usually, when you see the blue glint, enemies will be launching a flurry of attacks that you'll need to watch out for. However, if you can parry all of them, you'll deflect the final attack in the flurry and open the enemy up for a counter. When an enemy is using an attack that has a red glint to it, it means you won't be able to block or parry it, so you'll need to dodge to get out of the way. It's a good idea to invest a point into the perfect dodge skill in the survival skill tree in the growth menu, which allows you to counterattack if you can pull off a dodge at the last second. The final color-coded attack are the yellow-hued disarming attacks. If an enemy lands a disarming attack on you, your weapon will go flying out of your hand and you'll need to scramble to go get it. Otherwise, you'll be left out in the open without any way to defend yourself. To counter disarming attacks, hold and release the triangle button to perform a focus attack, which, if you hit an enemy before they disarm you, they will be the ones disarmed and left as an easy kill. What's more, if you disarm an enemy with the focus strike or disarm them with a disarming strike of your own by holding down L1 and R1 after unlocking the attack, you can grab an enemy's lost weapon and throw it at another enemy for another easy kill. Although Atsu starts Ghost of Yotei off with nothing more than the clothes on her back and a katana, you'll quickly start to expand her arsenal and come to understand that the game is essentially a samurai version of rock, paper, scissors. Each new weapon you acquire deepens your ability to engage with that system. Though you won't get them all at once, here's a quick breakdown of what weapons counter which enemy type. The single katana counters all other enemies with katanas. The dual katana counters spear-wielding enemies. The Yari spear counters enemies with kusurigamas, that's the sickle, ball and chain type weapon. The kusurigama counters enemies with shields, and the odachi counters the larger brute type enemies. Since you don't have every weapon right from the jump, the first few hours of Ghost of Yotei teach you that any weapon can deal with every type of attacker. However, as soon as you get the right weapon to take care of the right enemy type, you'll learn just just how much more effective you are if you play the game of rock, paper, scissors. To switch weapons, hold down R2 and you'll see your arsenal in the bottom right of the screen, and select the weapon based on which face button it correlates with. An easy way to remember which button goes to which weapon is by looking at the face buttons themselves. The single katana is mapped to the square button, which looks like the guard at the base of the blade. The dual katana is mapped to the X button, which looks like two swords crossing. The kusurigama is mapped to the circle button, which looks like the heavy flail at the end of the weapon's chain. The yari is mapped to the triangle button, which looks like the point of a spear, and the odachi is mapped to L2, which is the button with the biggest surface area on the controller, not counting the touchpad. Combat can be tricky to get a handle on at the start of Ghost of Yotei on account of Atsu only having her katana, so you'll want to get your hands on new weapons as soon as possible. Usually, you'll be prompted to learn new weapon skills when you enter new sections of the map. While Atsu might comment about her quest to get revenge on the Yotei Six and where to go next, she'll also mention that she can learn to use new weapons by visiting different masters. It's a good idea to go see the masters first before continuing the main quest to make things as easy as possible when you inevitably end up in a large-scale fight. Take note that eventually the main quest will put objectives in 2 different regions at the same time. You might be tempted to complete everything that one region has before starting the other, but it's a good idea to visit a region first, get the new weapon skill, and then visit the other region and get its weapon skill before continuing forward to have the most combat options at your disposal. After all, you'll need to complete both regions eventually, and it's best to make sure that you're going into each of them as prepared as you can possibly be. Similarly, Atsu has a large number of additional tools at her disposal. However, you won't pick up the vast majority of them simply by completing the main quest. You'll need to complete these sensei quests as marked on your map in order to get new equipment. They're less essential for dealing with enemies than the main weapons, however they are useful for setting yourself up for success in combat, so we'd recommend grabbing them by completing the quests tied to them as often as you can. When you're engaging with large-scale fights in Ghost of Yotei, you'll need to figure out an order for dealing with enemies based on their priority. Of course, it's a good idea to strike whenever you have an opening, regardless of which enemy you're facing off with, but it's best to prioritize taking care of archers first, no matter what, since they can easily interrupt your combos and put you in a vulnerable position. Luckily, archers go down really quickly, so you can close the gap between you and them, but you can also hit them with ranged options like the short and long bow or the matchlock rifle. If you can't get to the archers right away, keep an eye on the positioning of the rest of the group of attackers. If they bend over, it means an arrow is coming your way soon, so it's best to dodge with the circle button when you see that happen. Make sure you're listening to what's going on, since archers will also give a shout before they shoot, giving an audio cue as well. Ghost of Yotei likes to cook the books in your favor a little bit by having archers shoot at you and miss regardless of your positioning if you dodge in the window right before they fire. As you progress through Ghost of Yotei, take note that enemies will evolve their tactics. Each time you enter a new area, be sure to take note of what new enemy types are in that region and how enemies you're already familiar with behave. For example, archers in the early areas will shoot off a single arrow at you at the start of the game. However, as you progress through the story, they'll start firing off multiple shots in quick succession. New enemy types are introduced as you progress as well, such as the brute enemies with spears or normal-sized enemies with kusurigama. As you get more weapons, keep an eye on which enemy types are introduced so you can know how to easily counter them. In the gear menu, you'll see a small stats indicator in the bottom left corner of the screen that tells you how your current gear loadout is spec'd. You can change how you're spec'd by altering the charms and armor you have equipped, but it'll be difficult to create a loadout that's good at everything. Luckily, you start the game with 3 loadouts that you can easily switch to by hitting the square button, so you can fine-tune different elements of your build without having to switch everything out. It also means that you have different kit loadouts for all sorts of combat encounters. One of the biggest additions to Ghost of Yotei from Ghost of Tsushima are the wolves that will occasionally fight by your side. In fact, there's an entire skill tree devoted to the wolves' abilities that can only be expanded upon by completing wolf den missions scattered across the map. They can assist you by grabbing enemies in combat, help out with stealth assassinations, and perhaps most helpfully, they can join you in standoffs to take down an additional enemy per standoff. The wolves can help you take out larger enemy groups, so it's not a good idea to neglect them. There are a lot of different activities littering the map, but prioritizing the wolves is something we'd highly recommend. So those are 9 combat tips to help you get rolling in Ghost of Yotei. There's a lot of complexity to the game's combat, but if you can master the basics and roll with the changes that the game makes as it goes on, you'll be cutting through enemies like a master samurai in no time. For more on Ghost of Yotei and everything else, make sure you stick with IGN.